Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at First Chronicles chapters 13 through 16, where we read about the Ark and Worship. First Chronicles starts off chapters 1 through 9, the genealogies of Israel, and then you have the death of Saul in chapter 10. And from chapter 11 to the end of the book, now that's only the end of First Chronicles. We've got Second Chronicles coming up after that. But chapters 11 through 29 then are the reign of King David. And we're going to see his mighty men and the Ark and Worship. That's what we're going to look at now. The covenant promises in chapters 17 through 27. And then the site of the temple will be set. And, of course, this is all part of the history of Israel's first two kings. David is the first of the, actually, Saul is the first of those kings. He's right at the end. And then David. And then Second Chronicles is going to introduce Solomon. Verse 2, David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it is from the Lord our God, he wants to have a consensus. An important consensus is when God is on board, but also notice he's encouraging them to think about this. Let us send everywhere to our kinsmen who remain in all the land of Israel, also to the priests and Levites who are with them in their cities with pasture lands, that they may meet us. He's gathering an assembly. Verse 3, here's the purpose. And let us bring back the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. Now, the ark of our God refers to the ark of the covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines way back in 1 Samuel. Remember, they had fought a battle, and the Israelites had taken the Ark of the Covenant, I think they'd been watching too many Indiana Jones movies. They thought the Ark of the Covenant would be like a good luck charm, and then it would defeat the Philistines and win the battle for them. And instead, they lost the battle, and they lost the Ark, and the Philistines had taken it down into a Philistine temple where it had sat for a while. However, bad things started to happen to the Philistines. People started getting sick, and idols started falling over and crashing. And they thought, "Oh, this is not good luck. This is bad luck. We need to get rid of the ark," but they didn't want to destroy it. So they had placed it on a cart and sort of arranged it for the oxen. They sort of shooed the oxen away. It was interesting. They actually selected hungry oxen, thinking, listen, if the oxen just turn around and go get something to eat, then we've just been imagining it. But the oxen didn't do that. And so the oxen returned the ark to the Israelites, and there it came to one of the border towns at Kiriath Jearim. And the Israelites looked up, and here comes the ark with some oxen. And they took the ark and they put it into the house of one of the priests named Abinadab, and there it remained. And there it had remained for many a year. This is back before the days of Saul. This had all taken place. And then all throughout the kingdom of Saul, and now David has become king, and the ark is still in the house of Abinadab. So verse 7, they carried the ark of God on a new cart. Remember how it had been brought back to them from the Philistines in a cart, but that had been a long, long time ago. And so they decided, well, let's update the cart. Let's trade it in for a newer model on a new cart from the house of Abinadab. And Uzzah and Ahio drove the cart. So they've got it in a new cart. It's coming up to the area of Jerusalem. Hasn't entered the city yet. David and all Israel were celebrating before God with all their might, even with songs and with lyres and harps, tambourines, cymbals, with trumpets. It's a wonderful celebration as they're bringing the ark to Jerusalem. When they came to the threshing floor of Kidon, and notice if they're in the threshing floor is a wide open space where you can thresh the grain and throw it up in the air and let the air currents take it. That means they're not in the city yet. And so as they do this, Uzzah put out his hand to hold the ark because the oxen nearly upset it. You see, they were carrying it by cart, and God had actually given instructions on how the ark was to be carried. It was to be carried not by ox cart. It was to be carried by two poles held by priests. And they hadn't gone back and double-checked the instruction manual back in Exodus on how they were to treat the ark, how they were to handle it. They'd sort of forgotten that. And they'd gotten into this traditional way of doing it, established not by God, but by the Philistines. And Uzzah didn't want the ark to go rolling down the hill, and so he put out his hand because the oxen nearly upset it. And the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah. So he struck him down because he put out his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. God takes his observances seriously. God took the ark and his presence seriously. I believe today that God takes the meeting of his church seriously. We ought not to we ought not to be casual about our worship. Well, verse 11, then David became angry because of the Lord's outburst. And I want you to notice there's a little sort of play on words here. The Lord's outburst, the word outburst is the Hebrew word Perez, against Uzzah. And he called that place Perez-uzzah to this day. So because of God's outburst, the place becomes known as the outburst of Uzzah. And apparently there was a Perez-uzzah street. I don't know, near the place of Jerusalem. Verse 13. So David did not take the ark with him to the city of David, but took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Now Obed-Edom, we're going to see him a bit later. He's of the family of the priest, sort of a VIP among the priests, not the high priest. And thus the ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house 3 months. And the Lord blessed the family of Obed-Edom with all that he had. What did that blessing look like? We're not told. We're going to get maybe a little bit of a hint in a bit, but I don't want to say because we don't know. But the ark stays there in this temporary home, moves in with his family. So chapter 13, we have the Ark of the Covenant relocated, but then chapter 14, you expect to see more of the ark. And instead, there's a story about the Philistines who attacked David at Jerusalem. You see, the Philistines had no problem with David when David was an enemy of Saul and Saul had been king of Israel. They had figured the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but now Saul has died and David is consolidating his power. For a while there, he was just a tribal leader. The Philistines probably weren't too worried about that. But now he is gathering all the tribes together, and he has put his capital city in Jerusalem. And so the Philistines attack David, and David is victorious. That's all in chapter 14. And then in chapter 15, we see the ark. We're back to the Ark of the Covenant, and now it's going to be brought into a more regular dwelling out of the house of Obed-Edom, and it's going to be brought into a tent. And then chapter 16, just a preview of where we're heading, we're going to see songs of praise, and those songs are going to be right out of the Psalms, but we'll look at that in just a few minutes. Chapter 16, verse 1, and they brought the ark of God. They were getting ready for it. Actually, they were moving it at the end of chapter 15. There's a little notation that Michal, the daughter of Saul, who was married to David, saw David dancing before the Lord. 2 Samuel gives a much more lengthy story about that interaction between Michal and David and what takes place as a result. There's only it's like a cross reference here. It's in one verse. And now in chapter 16, verse 1, and they brought in the ark of God and placed it inside the tent. Notice that term, the tent, which David had pitched for it. That's the Hebrew word ohel. And it's a regular word for tent, but that's not the mishkan. That's not the tabernacle. You see, the tabernacle isn't being moved. Only the ark is being moved, but it needs a place to you're not going to sit it out in the rain. And so it has a place in which to stay, which David had pitched for it. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before God. Verse 4, he appointed some of the Levites as ministers before the ark of the Lord, even to celebrate and to thank and praise the Lord God of Israel. Notice who some of these Levites are. Asaph, he's the chief. Asaph is going to be a fairly common name when we get to the Psalms. He's the music director, the choir director, and we're going to see him getting into that role right here. And second to him, Zechariah and Jael and Shemi Ramoth, Jehiel, Mattithiah, uh, Eliab, Benaiah, Obed-Edom. Remember Obed-Edom? We saw him before. He's the one who housed the ark for a while. And Jael with musical instruments, harps, lyres, and also Asaph played loud sounding cymbals, and Benaiah and Jahaziel, the priest, blew trumpets continually before the Ark of the Covenant. So again, the musical instruments are out, and this is going to be a regular pattern of worship. Verse 7, then on that day, David first assigned Asaph and his relatives to give thanks to the Lord. And so David's going to give them instructions, and the instructions will be in the form of a series of songs. And so as they're giving thanks, and this is actually part of the psalm that actually is going to say, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he's good. And so 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 8 through verse 22, is a whole series of, that's only part of the songs, but those verses are copied, and in Psalm 105, verses 1 through 15, it's word for word, it's the same, where this song is made its way into the Psalms. And then as you continue, verse 23 through 33, which there's no break here in First Chronicles, it's part of the same song, but that's echoed in Psalm 96, verses 1 through 13. So these become actually psalms from the book of Psalms. And then the last few verses, verses 34 through 36, they are found in Psalm 106. Notice how the first section was 105. You just turn the page now and you're in 106, verse 1, and also verses 47 and 48. So these portions of this big psalm in Chronicles verses 8 through verse 36, they make their way into the book of Psalms. Verse 37, so he left Asaph and his relatives there before the ark of the covenant of the Lord to minister before the ark continually, as every day's work required, and Obed-Edom with his 68 relatives. I can't help but wonder, is that part of the way he was blessed? He got a lot of relatives. I don't know if that's the case or not. But Obed-Edom, also the sons of Jeduthun and Hosah as gatekeepers. And so these are going to minister before the Ark of the Covenant as a regular pattern. And there's Obed-Edom with his relatives. Now, verse 39, he left Zadok the priest. Remember Zadok, he's the high priest, and his relatives, the priests, before the tabernacle of the Lord in the high place, which was at Gibeon. Now, that's where the tabernacle was. You say, I thought the tabernacle was a tent. It was, but it had become sort of non-portable now. It was there continually. Notice verse 40, to offer burnt offerings to the Lord on the altar of burnt offering, continually morning and evening. Every morning and every evening there would be a sacrifice made, and there would be prayers, and they would go into the tabernacle. Now it's a little bit more permanent. And they would offer incense upon the altar of incense. And that's a regular pattern. Notice, even according to all that's written in the law of the Lord, which he commanded Israel. That's going to continue until you'll have the day when the tabernacle will be replaced by the temple. That hasn't happened yet. That's not going to be until the days of Solomon. David's going to make preparations for it, where the ark and the tabernacle will finally come together and be in one place, but that's not yet. And so instead, we see this place of worship, the tabernacle of the Lord, in Gibeon. And here it's going to remain. Verse 41, with them were Heman and Jeduthun and the rest of those who were chosen, who were designated by name to give, and notice how it ends, to give thanks to the Lord because his loving kindness is everlasting. Remember how David had started this whole section where he had instructed Asaph and his relatives back in verse 7 to give thanks to the Lord. And then in that psalm, there had been an instruction, a call, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And now they're doing that which was called for them in the psalm to do. They're giving thanks to the Lord because his loving kindness is, and I like to translate that word loving kindness, chesed is the Hebrew word there. I like to render it loyalty. Loving kindness works, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is his loyalty, where God's loyalty is continuing even in the days of David and even in the days of today.